I was an activist in high school in Bacoima, which was an African-American Latino community in transition. And there were a lot of tensions between African-American and Latino students in high school. So I was a leader of the BSU, Black Student Union, and began to have meetings with leaders of MECHA, the Latino component, and we built some coalitions around that. And I've been involved in activism and organizing ever since. So in high school, this was the late 60s, early 70s, so it was very much still in the era of mass movements for social change in this country. After high school, I became involved in the Black Panther Party, first in Los Angeles, and for a brief time moved to Oakland, and then moved back to Los Angeles, became involved in some community-based efforts, anti-gang efforts, and youth programs, and those kinds of things, and eventually began doing community organizing around police abuse issues. Young African women have been killed by the police. So we put together a coalition, did organizing in various parts of the city, gathered signatures, and while we didn't quite succeed, we came the closest in recent history of qualifying a proposition for the ballot through grassroots organizing. But how do you organize leadership and programs beyond just the immediate fight, and so you can be more proactive? So those are the kind of trainings I was doing with various environmental justice networks.
Their movement significant.
This was a time when there were actually real mass movements, so there were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets were involved in social change. It wasn't as systematic as traditional conventional community organizing. In fact, part of my evolution was learning both those and trying to keep the dynamism and the spontaneity and the passion of the movement with a more strategic and systematic, sustained approach of modern community organizing. It's probably a natural part of my personality. It's probably partly the Black Panther Party was part of the movement that was more paramilitary and more militant. And so there was a level of rigor and discipline. From early on in my life, I took and spent several years doing martial arts. So that also brings a level of rigor and discipline as well. So those kind of combinations. You know, my father was always an activist himself. But he always, when we were kids, sat us down and had us look at key moments. So when Martin Luther King was assassinated, or Bobby was assassinated, I was 5, 6, 7 at that time, and wanted to be outside playing. But he would sit us down, and there would be the hours of documentation about the history and what it meant. He'd sit us down and make us watch it. So I think that instilled in me an appreciation for movement and leadership that eventually led me to be an activist and take serious the desire to make a difference in changing problem conditions in our society and the world itself. Clearly my formative years in high school and young adulthood was very much part of the anti-Vietnam War movement, the student movement, the Black Power movement. I always found that very inspiring and saw the possibility of everyday people in huge numbers becoming involved in trying to make social change. And so when I talk to my organizers today, we don't have those same kind of mass movements, and so they wonder sometimes is it really possible. And of course, I saw that it was. And so part of the struggle is how do you figure out community organizing where you create sustained effort, but not become so locked into your own vehicle that you preempt the possibility of more spontaneous, larger movements, which ultimately, in my mind, is what we need to win social change. To say a word about what I learned on the movement side, then what I learned on the community organizing side, and then the continued experiment that continues to this day to try to take the best of both those. Clearly one part of the movement was passion, was spontaneity, was a large idea or a vision that resonated and motivated with lots of people. When I'm talking to my organizers, say that in a movement like that, you're not really organizing people because they get the idea and they start doing things themselves. The activity goes beyond any form of organization. An example, with the civil rights movement, when there were the sit-ins or at the counters to desegregate in the South, certainly organizations that were organizing that, at a certain point, people just started doing it. They wanted to be a part of it. They believed in the idea. They believed in the possibility of change. So that spontaneity is probably a real strength of the movement itself. Now, the limitation of that is how do you sustain it? Because you can't, in any aspect of life, you can't live off a passion forever. You burn yourself out. On the community organizing side, community organizing really evolved. And in some sense, the receding of those mass movements actually paralleled the rise of modern community organizing, whether it was Zelensky or the farm workers or any of the major schools of organizing, where there was a more disciplined approach, an approach that paid attention to building institutions, paid attention to more systematic leadership development, which allowed those institutions to sustain themselves over time. It becomes almost tactical, almost technical. And so the big ideas that inspired the waves of people are sometimes lost in that particular approach. So that's in some sense a strength and weakness of modern community organizing. On the other hand, the movements lack the structure to sustain themselves, and they also tend to revolve around charismatic leadership. So certainly one thing that I have learned and tried to carry forward that comes from modern community organizing is not to try to build a cult of personality, not to build the organizing based on one charismatic leader, although charisma is important in terms of motivating people, to really build institutions where there are organizers and where there are grassroots leaders and members that have the skills and ability and the vision to motivate people to become involved. And it doesn't center around any one particular individual. That's a delicate dance. So we have to be open to something beyond the form of organization, which is the vehicle we're trying to build, because ultimately we want to inspire a movement that's much beyond that. So that balance we try to explore and achieve. A part of what I've done over the years and part of the training that we've done is something called power analysis, and so we've developed a methodology of helping grassroots folks understand power and how it works, how it's been exercised against us, and how we need to organize and build coalitions to counter that. There's a range of grassroots leaders over the years, not staff people, but just leaders that we have been able to recruit and train. The skills and abilities they have developed, it's just very inspiring to me. There's a whole generation of organizers, young organizers, many different places around the country, doing very interesting things. But we haven't figured out how to rekindle that mass movement that creates society-wide and systemic change. So we tend to sometimes be fighting tactical battles. We can win tactical victories, sometimes lose, sometimes win, but the broad societal change that we think are necessary to address issues of poverty or poor education or the inequities of this society, we have yet to achieve. And the times in which we live, change is pretty incremental and oftentimes slow in coming. So the difficulty for staff and organizers, particularly young organizers, to see that the dedication and the hours they're putting in is adding up to something. It's making a difference in terms of change we want to make. So how do we stay true to a bottom-up grassroots organizing model, but push ourselves to achieve the scale necessary to really contend with the powers that we're contending with?
And what is the most satisfying about being an organizer for you?
The grassroots leader who became involved because of some problem they were confronting, whether it was an economic or social problem, just their own narrow self-interest, to seeing themselves connected with a neighborhood and a community and a movement and sustaining themselves over time. What you do as an organizer is very inspiring because it shows you that change is possible. Part of our challenge of organizing is how to shift people's consciousness. We have a set of beliefs, values and beliefs about how we think the world should be. That doesn't match how the world is right now. And so part of our job is to try to win people over or find people like ourselves, enough people to want to fight for this vision of society itself. And so you see people developing from a narrow self-interest to a broader identity with neighborhood and the world. That's very inspiring. And obviously we want to replicate that again and again. And then also for me, at this stage of my career, the new organizer, you see running organizations or being in charge of regions or doing new experiments in terms of how to achieve social change. It's also inspiring because you know that I've replicated myself tenfold, which is the most satisfying. We haven't built what we need to build, not enough. And so we stayed at it. So we have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people around a vision of society, a vision of the world, that are active in their communities, active in their neighborhoods, active in this country to make that vision a reality. We're not there yet, and it may take us 10 years to get there, but that's what I like to see.